Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today on Halloween. And we'll give everyone just a couple more minutes to jump in. We're seeing the attendee numbers jump, so we'll give everyone 60 seconds or so to get in, and then we'll kick off today. Eric, I heard you have a great costume for Halloween this year.
I do, but it's not as quite as photogenic as yours. I've got three little girls, so I'm gonna be a minion along with my 5-year-old daughter is gonna be a minion as well. My wife is going as Gru. What is this?
This is I got a nice little disco man going on. So Sarah helped me pick out a great outfit here, and I love the shirt, honestly. And then I saw the jacket, and it was in the little Amazon package, and I was like, that's a weird colored jacket. And I pulled it out, and it's the shiny material, and I was like, she knows me. She knows me quite well. So yeah, Disco Man today. So got Disco Joey here to talk to you about VC secrets and how you can build um, leveraging the awesome programs that exist. So, all right, friends, we're gonna go ahead and get kicked off for our conversation today. Wanting to tell you a little bit more about venture capital secrets and how you can double your money as you're going after this. So, thanks everyone for taking the time to join. See some names that we know on this list and see some names that we don't, which is great. That's the point, was to help build the relationships and conversations here. So thanks for taking the time to do so. Quick introduction. I'm Joey. I'm the president here at the Outpost. Our mission is to help companies grow from 0 to 30 million in the defense space, and specifically helping you get your first set of contracts to how then do you get to annual recurring revenue and long-term customers with the US government. So that's my background. Eric, I'll pass it over to you.
Hey everyone, Eric Blatt. I'm a partner and practice lead for our IP and dual use technology practices at Scale LLP. Joey and the Outpost are great for helping you sort of do the capture product market fit. And then when you win the contracts, there's all kinds of issues there in terms. So we help to sort of streamline those legal operations, assure compliance, and help to protect your technology and sort of preserve your business model.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know Eric, I've had a chance to work with him multiple times over the last 5, 7 years at this point. And he's the first person I call when things get sticky or I'm like, hey, I have a legal question. So definitely recommend that if you ever run into that situation, Eric and team be the first group that you call, because they're the right people to do so with. All right, friends, we're going to dive in here on a little bit of the venture capital secrets and how you can leverage the SBIR program for strategic growth and advantage. So, you did a quick intro of who we are. Often, if you're raising venture capital funds, that typical funding journey, we did average round sizes, pre-seed's about 500K, seed stage is 1.5 million, series A is 10, series B is 35 million. Now, if you're going through this process, normally you're also going to be giving up equity as a founder to make sure that, hey, the VCs have a portion of that and they have incentive to make those investments. Well, what if there was a way in a world where you could augment the capital that was being brought in by VCs? So this way you can, A, as a founder, give up less capital, and B, as a VC firm, say, hey, for less amount of money, we can have a larger impact in the growth of a company. Or depending on the stage that you're coming in for where a company is at, there's an opportunity here to say, okay, if maybe you took 10% in the pre-seed or seed stage, and then you brought in non-dilutive capital here for Series A, then you would still get to protect. You have less dilution as you're going through that process. So there's opportunities here leveraging the SBIR program to really get after this, because there's funding amounts that match your pre-seed stage at $200,000 for some phase ones. Your seed stage, there's phase twos out there that are anywhere from 1.2 to $2 million. And the most interesting part about this is now that there's these phase two enhancement programs that are ranging from 15 to $30 million. So they really get to help augment here on the Series A to Series B side. So
Sorry to jump in. We did have a comment there. Is there any way to blow up the slides or present full screen?
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for a call out. Let me pull it up. our friends. Can
Looks
you,
awesome.
there we go. Thanks, team. So, we're going through the typical startup journey with SBIR funding. There's options here to get more non-dilutive capital to the table. This is both beneficial to the founders and to the VCs that are part of the play, because it allows for more capital to be brought to the table for further growth of the company. And so we talked, a little bit about that funding journey with SBIR. There's these larger programs here today that exist with StratFi and Army Catalyst that really allow you to leverage capital to get after new and unique opportunities. So we're going to do a quick overview of the SBIR program. For those of you that don't know, it's $4 billion a year. That's going to about 4,000 companies. Phase one is anywhere from 50,000 to 275,000. Really matching around that seed pre-seed area, and allows you to do that proof of concept, customer discovery, right and match where you're trying to grow as a company. Phase two is that tech development, 750,000 to 1.8 million. This is really about that prototyping, defining that product market fit. And this phase 2B part is where the secret is there's some large amount of investments happening between 15 to 30 million from the government side that take in both SBIR funding and government funding to really help you accelerate. And the unique thing about this is they're taking 0% equity or IP ownership here. So you might be wondering, who participates in this? What does that funding look like? Well, there are 11 different agencies that are participating through this, the Department of Defense being the largest one, with 2.3 billion being put in place with these contracts. And that's where we're going to dive into a little bit later today. The second biggest is Health and Human Services at 1.2 billion. Then you have a smattering of other agencies with various amounts of funding here as well. So you're like, hey, we're on this journey. Who else has done this? How do we know this works? Well, the Air Force has leveraged the SBIR program, and through their StratFi process have created 24 different companies that have been valued at greater than $1 billion. So 24 different unicorns have come out of this process by leveraging the matching funds program, the StratFi program, to really accelerate their growth as a company, not only about finding product market fit, but also about using that to generate traction and engagement with the government stakeholders. So how can you know when it's the right time to layer SBIR into your high growth strategy? As a founder, you should be thinking about, hey, if I want to get additional research and development funding, if we are building our product, we see that it has a potential military application, we now want to use that information to say, hey, I can maybe help solve a government need. There are open topic solicitations all across the Department of Defense. This is a requirement put in law a couple of years ago. So the Air Force, Army, and Navy all have their own versions of the open topic process, where you can pitch your idea to the US government and where in the DoD you want to work with. If as a founder, you're saying, I want to bring in more capital without having to give up equity, the US government has these programs that are specifically driven to create more companies and drive success. The entire intent of the SBIR program is to help companies drive to commercialization and be successful companies as they're growing and scaling. If you as a VC are looking at your companies and saying, hey, we want to supercharge this next round and bring in more capital, we would love to have a partner in this process. This is where the government can come in to be a partner for where you're going. And one thing to think about as you're going through this is you need to be patient. VC funding rounds can close as fast as a month, or it can take 6+ months to go through a fundraising process. Going after some of these larger government grant opportunities and contracts can take anywhere from 6 to 18 months. So you need to make sure you have the strategic bandwidth to be able to engage in these areas. And you want to make sure that you also have the patience to know that these opportunities are going to take time to cultivate and grow. Think about it as large scale enterprise selling is really what you're leaning into. And you want to make sure that both from a VC firm perspective and a company perspective, that you truly are willing to engage government stakeholders, and specifically around Department of Defense stakeholders and the military use cases that come along with that.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And to sort of double down on from the VC's perspective, from the investor's perspective, if you're putting money in seed, Series A, you're putting a certain amount of money in and getting a certain portion on the cap table. And if the company then is able to leverage SBIR, whether that's a phase 2, TACFI, STRATFI, it causes that initial capital investment to go further so the company can extend the runway, grow more between rounds, and so your valuation is preserved, and you sort of defray some of that dilution. And there's also, particularly with the TACFI and STRATFI opportunities, there's also matching funding opportunities. And so very often you can put capital into the company and immediately see that capital contribution doubled or sometimes more than doubled vis-a-vis the government input.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for jumping in there. So many of you might be thinking like, hey, how do I get after some of these opportunities? We wanted to highlight the initial dates that are out there for the DoD SBIR cycle. The next deadline is going to be on the 19th of November right here. And then they're doing a monthly cadence after this going into 2025. So there's consistent opportunities to find where is your fit, where can you go out and explore, and you can explore these on the DoD SBIR website here as well. And we'll send a link out there for you too. So as a company or a venture firm, you might be thinking, hey, what do our companies need to get after some of this? If we're trying to figure out what these opportunities look like, we don't really know what STRATFI or the Army Catalyst program are. How do we make sure we have the right team and are prepared to get after this? The first thing that you're going to need is you want to have someone on your team that is willing to focus on federal business development efforts. Someone who might be a veteran, someone who has experience in doing acquisitions, doing contracting. You want to make sure you're getting the right BD talent in place, that they can speak the same language as the Department of Defense, so you can communicate effectively and understand where there might be product market fit. You want to have grant writing expertise. You're going to need to make sure that you have skilled writers on your team, because the government proposal process is very specific, has a very unique way of taking in information, and has specific evaluation criteria that you need to be writing against. So when you are going out and pitching it to different VC firms, that process tends to be very customizable. You're building on it, you're iterating on it, you're moving slides around to say this might be a good fit. As you're going through a government proposal process, slides need to be in the exact order that the government says they need to be submitted to. So you need to have people who have that expertise. You need to make sure you can bring your technical team to the table. You need to be successful in these early stages when you have technical folks being a part of the conversation and shaping that proposal response as well. And then you want to make sure that you're aware of the different budgeting requirements that go as part of this process. There's a lot of work and effort around fixed price contracts, around cost plus contracts. If you're going into the world of government contracting, you want to make sure that you have people who are aware of these federal standards, and there's people you can call to help with that here as well. All right. So your odds of success, you might be wondering, like, well, if we're going after these things, how successful are they generally? So for phase ones, for the Department of Defense, it's generally around a 10 to 15% success rate. Phase twos are generally around 40 to 50%. You'll see that this sort of applies across all the other federal agencies and non-DoD programs as well. And so as you're going through this, the funding rates here actually are pretty high if you take a look at grant applications and where you're going. So if you've now been successful post your phase ones, phase twos, that you've gotten that $1.25 million, well, what happens next? So the big thing that we want to talk about here, and it looks like I copied and pasted some language here at the bottom, we'll get to, is that there's sequential phase two programs. There's non-dilutive capital that you can bring in from these sequential phase two programs that are up to $30 million. There's the Office of Strategic Capital program that's offering $150 million in loan programs here as well. And as you're going through this, thinking about what is that opportunity, I wanted to highlight the STRATFI program as one of the ways that you can double down on sort of the capital you can bring in the front door here. So the Strat 5 process is specifically meant to accelerate companies that have already gotten a phase 2. So if we're looking at the stage of a company growth, right, you're probably post the seed, you're looking at your Series A or maybe getting into your Series B, companies that have found that product market fit. And now they're looking to scale within the Department of Defense. So the Strat 5 program can bring an additional $15 million of capital. The unique
Joey,
thing about
how many TAC-Fi, Strat-Fi companies have you worked with? And what do the odds of success look like there if you've already gotten the phase 1 and phase 2?
Yeah, great question, Eric. So highlighting what happened in this last year for the Strat 5 program, there were 30 different Strat 5s awarded this last year, and there were 128 of the TAC-Fi awards. So if we're taking a look at this, you're going to see that there were 30 different contracts that were at least $15 million, or in, a few different other contracts here that were at 1.9. Marty, I see you're asking me to refresh this as well. So I'll do that right now and pull that up. Go back here. So as you're thinking about the matching funding process, we've helped over a dozen plus companies go through the Strat 5 process and the TAC-Fi side as well. We're seeing that even in this last year, there were 583 million of SBIR funds that came through the Strat 5 process. That was matched with 703 million of government funding here too. And then the venture world brought in 620 million. So what you're seeing in this is that for all of the private matching funds that have come in over this time period, there's also matching government funds and SBIR funds that come to the table. So effectively, you're getting to double your money on the private capital side if you're going after these programs, and you get to bring in these matching funds through the dual use Strat-Fi and TAC-Fi process. We have a separate webinar and conversation which dives into the mechanics and specifics of how you leverage Strat-Fi and TAC-Fi. But if we take a look at the program and the numbers over the years, the program has funded over 4,800 companies over the last few years. There's been over $29 billion of private investment into the portfolio. And it's because they're leveraging these types of programs that the Strat-Fi process is incentivizing private capital to continue coming to the table. You're seeing companies that are continuing to go through the SBIR process that are going out and raising money on the commercial side, and they're continuing to be successful. This focus on dual use and bringing in matching funding has been a core part of the success and growth for the companies here. So the next program that I want to highlight is the Army Catalyst program. The unique thing about this is it can bring in an additional $7 million of SBIR funds. It requires $3.5 million from your Army customer, and then it says $3.5 million from industry integrator. The biggest announcement they made this last week during the Army Catalyst AMA is that they're open to the conversation that your industry integrator funds are actually VC funds being brought to the table. So you can now get that money matched. And in this case, right, if you're bringing 3.5 million in from the VC fund, that's actually going to be quadrupled because it'll be a total of about $14 million that can come to the table here. The Army Catalyst program, unique thing about this versus the Strat-Fi process is this is a rolling solicitation throughout the year. So if you already are working and have a phase 2 somewhere in whether it be in the Department of Defense or anywhere across the federal government, you can actually jump in and work towards a Army SBIR Catalyst Award here, and win a large opportunity to double down with your Army customer. The core part of what I want to highlight for both the Army Catalyst program and Strat-Fi on the Air Force side are that they're intended here to get your government customer, your Air Force customer, your Army customer incentives to commit their funding and come to the table. And that incentive is same for the private sector here. If private sector is putting in money, you're seeing that you're getting a committed customer here on the government side from the Army or the Air Force. And then the SBIR program comes in to double that money that's coming in here. One more key program to highlight is the Office of Strategic Capital's loan program. So if you are sitting in some of the critical technology areas, there's 31 different critical tech areas for the US. This can be across advanced manufacturing, cybersecurity, quantum computing, space, biotech. There are loan opportunities for companies that are growing and scaling. So if you have a track record, if you have revenue, if you've gotten capital before and you're looking at, hey, how do we scale out our growth for the defense industrial base or the commercial sector? There's a lot of opportunities to pursue the loan program. And those loan sizes are anywhere from 10 to 150 million. And the application window for this opens up on 2 January, so here in a couple months. So it's a great thing to consider as you're saying, how do we bring additional non-dilutive capital to the table? US government's really leaning forward into helping drive this. And in order for you to be successful here, you guys also need to be considering some of the legal implications and risks that go along with the programs that we just mentioned. So I want to pass it off to Eric to talk through some of these questions and challenges.
So as Joey highlighted, there is a lot of funding available, and the government is not asking for all that much in return for that funding. It's not taking any equity. The IP requirements or requests from the government are pretty minimal. We can talk through that. You have to sort of build the tech, you have to hit your milestones, but it's a pretty good deal. And there are a lot of companies, obviously, we highlighted 4,000 companies receiving these awards every year. But there's a lot of companies out there that are sitting on the sidelines and not taking advantage. And if you look in the investment community, there are some VC firms that are encouraging companies to go after this opportunity. But there's a lot of VCs that are out there saying, hey, this could be a distraction. What are the sort of the business risks to doing this? Maybe let's set that aside and just go after private capital to finance the business. So what are these issues that are out there that are holding companies back? What are the most common things that I hear from companies, sort of those pain points as they're making that decision? And I highlighted 5 of them that I do hear pretty frequently. One is, what's the government's IP ask? Is this going to negatively impact my IP strategy and my business model? Number 2, is my company eligible? Are there any sort of secret hidden hooks there that are going to get me into trouble later? Number 3, accounting. Am I going to have to completely revamp my company culture by making everyone fill out timesheets every day? Number 4, export controls. If I take DoD funding in particular, is that going to tie up my technology so that now I can't sell abroad? Maybe my ultimate ambition is to be have international sales. Is that going to prevent me from getting there? And then number 3, if I receive a federal contract and it has X pages of FAR clauses in there, is there going to be risk there? What does compliance look like? So Joey, you want to take it to the next slide? So the good news is those questions all have pretty good answers, but I just kind of wanted to talk through the pain points I hear and sort of how I think about sort of the simplest solutions to those questions. So on the IP front, what are the concerns that I hear about from folks that are considering applying? Number 1, is the government going to own my software? Is the piece that I create under this federal contract, I'm going to give it to the government, and am I not going to be able to use it on other contracts? The answer to that question is no, you own it. The government's going to receive a very narrow license. Number 2, can the government share my technology with my competitors? Again, the answer there is going to be basically no. We can talk through the details. And then number 3, what about my patent portfolio? I've talked to companies that have incredibly valuable patent assets, and the idea of taking any risk at all for those patent assets in exchange for $1 million here or there, it's just not worth it. And so they want to understand exactly what the implications are. The good news for most, the government really doesn't ask for much on IP on SBIRs. If you look at federal contracts, these are the most favorable contracts that the government awards as far as IP rights. So for most phase 1 and phase 2 SBIR awards, The government really expects pretty minimal deliverables. So you want to think about what you're actually giving to the government. Companies are generally a lot more nervous if you have to turn over your code. If you're just turning in reports, companies tend to think that's pretty low risk. For phase 1 and phase 2, usually the government's only expecting reports. Sometimes there's a prototype, and you can get to the nuances there, but usually you're just producing reports. As far as what you actually do to give to the government gets a sort of an evaluation license called SBIR data rights or SBIR data rights. Essentially, what SBIR data rights say is that the government can look at it internally, but it's software. They only get sort of a one-seat license. They can't make a bunch of copies and operationalize it. If it's technical data, manufacturing specifications, et cetera, they can look at it, but they can't manufacture anything. And then, very importantly, they cannot share it outside the government to third-party contractors, except in sort of very rare circumstances like emergency repair and overhaul that are going to be protected by NDA. So essentially, it's locked up. The government can look at it, but if they want to use it in any sort of operational way, they need to come back to you and ask for permission, and that gives you an opportunity to charge a license. Importantly, you do need to know, this is the number one thing we see companies mess up, is if you want these protections for your deliverables, you have to properly mark those deliverables with the SBIR data rights legend. So that is one way to actually screw this up, is to not know that you have to mark. And then as far as your patent portfolio, the patents that you come in with are almost certainly going to be untouched by government license rights. But it does make sense to sort of think a little bit about what you're building under contract if you want to patent it, because if you can conceive and make your first reduction to practice outside the scope of the contract, the government will receive essentially no rights in the patents. If you file on something that is truly federally funded because the idea popped into your head or you built the first thing under contract, then you may have some ties there. So that is one thing to look out for. Next slide.
Eric, we had a question come in that's relevant to this slide if you don't mind answering. We had Michael ask, what happens if I have SBIR data rights and then a large company like an IBM or someone comes in with a competing offering?
So the competing offering, it depends, is the answer. If you have SBIR data rights and the government has not shared your SBIR data with the competing company, you may not have any claim. Sort of SBIR data rights sort of work like a non-disclosure agreement with the federal government. So the government is bound not to share it with the third party, but if the third party independently develop something, the SBIR data rights are typically not going to help. What would help in that instance would be patents. So if the third-party competitive solution infringes your patents, you may have a claim there. And then there's SBIR data rights at phase 3 mandate, which sometimes people talk about. We can get into the details for another discussion, but generally that phase 3 mandate says that if the government is going to acquire the technology developed under a SBIR contract, they're supposed to come back and acquire it from the company that developed it initially. But the sort of that line of law has been pretty diluted by the courts. And so it really comes down to, did the government take your deliverables and give it to that third-party company?
And Eric, I would add a little bit to that is if there is somebody that you're competing with in this space, the government does, per US code, have to provide a preference to SBIR companies.
It does.
So that could be a way for you to have a leg up on competition when you're competing against a large firm that's a small business.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a whole nother webinar. So, well,
SBIR eligibility. And I know we're running a little bit tight on time here, but just note that there's a common understanding that all the government really cares about in terms of SBIR eligibility are the end owners, the ultimate beneficial owners, U.S. citizens. And there is actually a little bit more nuance on that. The rules are written in a way that they also care how the ownership is held. So if we could go to the next slide. If you think about that SBIR awardee at the bottom, the items in green are good ways to hold ownership interests, and the column in red can create a problem. So the rules care about whether the equity is the equity in the SBIR awardee is directly held by U.S. persons, or at most one layer between the U.S. persons and the SBIR awardee. So on the left, we have direct ownership that counts toward your 50% threshold. In the middle, there's one pass-through entity between the U.S. persons and the SBIR awardee. That also counts toward the threshold. On the right, we have 2 layers between the U.S. persons and the SBIR awardee, and that typically will not count toward the 50% threshold. So you do have to be a little bit careful about how you structure things. And for the investors in the audience, this is something to keep in mind. If you want your companies to be SBIR eligible, you actually have to structure your fund fairly carefully to help them get there, assuming that you're going to take a significant portion of the cap table. Usually that comes up around Series B. Joey, next slide. Accounting. Startups hate to enter time. They don't want to be on cost accounting. And they also don't want to worry about audit risk. The good news is a lot of the SBIR programs out there, particularly with the DoD, are now using firm fixed price contracts where you just have a schedule of milestones that you need to hit. So you turn in your monthly progress report or your quarterly progress report, and you just get that amount of funding as a flat fee for turning in your report. And there's no cost accounting. Don't have to fill out timesheets. You just invoice for that deliverable. And so if you're interested in avoiding cost accounting, I would encourage you to look at AFWERX, Army, some of these other firm fixed price contract programs. If you are looking at grants or some of these cost reimbursable contracts, I think Navy phase 2s are currently cost reimbursable for the most part. I would encourage folks to go ahead and hire an accounting firm that specializes in this area. Next slide. Export controls. People worry, hey, I'm going to take some government funding on this technology. Is that going to impact my ability to sell abroad? The answer is generally going to be no. A lot of the contracts actually will call out that the technology, particularly AFWERX contracts, will call out that the technology is being developed for both civilian and military purposes. It's dual use, and therefore it's not going to be ITAR restricted. And generally, export controls, this is a body of law that sort of exists outside the scope of your contract. So if your product is export controlled, it's sort of export controlled regardless of whether or not you take military contracts, DoD contracts. So if you are going to be selling abroad, exporting, I would encourage folks to look into the rules there. But generally, taking a contract, a SBIR contract, is not going to affect that outcome. There are a few SBIR contracts. Some of the contracts will be awarded as other transactions that has a template that does say sort of the specific technology that's being developed under that contract cannot be transferred to foreign entities without the contracting officer's approval. But generally, that is going to be limited only to the specific thing you build under the contract. So you can sort of think about, hey, I've got my commercial baseline, and I'm going to build, this particular feature on top of it. Maybe that feature will be restricted, but the rest will not be. And oftentimes that feature is going to be sort of military only, so it's not a problem. Then it's also limited, that restriction is also limited to technology transfer, so generally does not cover product sales. Next slide. And FAR compliance. So this is the last one. Hey, I received this big contract. What all does it say? There are some requirements in there. So for example, a lot of them will say you have to have a code of business ethics and conduct that requires you to have certain items in there, certain equal opportunity policies. You probably, if you're going to be serious about doing government contracting, it probably does make sense to walk through those with an attorney or someone else who can help you, because you do want to have those policies in place, but it's generally not a heavy lift, and it's worth doing generally for the size of the opportunity. And I think that might be it, Joey.
That it is. Thank you so much for that info, Eric. Like that, these are critical parts for helping drive success in these programs. We have a few questions that have come up that I'd like to ask you as well. Rama asked, what happens if we had conceived of an invention related to the subject prior to winning a contract, but didn't file the provisional application prior to project kickoff?
Sure. The filing date of the patent application, I think of it as sort of a best practice to file before your contract is awarded, because that conclusively demonstrates that whatever the contents of that patent application were conceived outside the scope of the contract. But the actual filing date is not part of the legal test in terms of whether the government receives rights. It's just whether you conceived of the invention that ultimately issues the patent. So I would encourage you, particularly if you're pretty early on in your contract, put down some contemporaneous notes. Hey, we conceived of this. We had this idea, prior to contract award. Just so if it's incredibly unlikely there ever will be a problem. But if there were a question on this from the government, it would be helpful to have contemporaneous notes saying, this is what the status, this is what we had coming into the contract. So I would encourage folks, if you're in that position, at least write down what you had prior to contract and put it in a contemporaneous document rather than waiting until the government knocks on the door.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. One more question for you. Can I still use my foreign contractors for things that are not related to a specific SBIR contract?
Yes, qualified yes. So under a reciprocal contract, there's a requirement that 100% of the work under the contract be performed in the United States. And so you wouldn't be, unless you get a waiver from the contracting officer. So you typically wouldn't be able to hire a foreign contractor to do any work on the contract. You wouldn't be able to give them a subcontract unless you can get that waiver from the contracting officer. But if you do have sort of the rest of your business operations and you have relationships with contractors located overseas, you can likely continue doing that. You just have to make sure that you're complying with those export and export compliance items, which again exist sort of outside of the contract. They're just general things to check on when you're working with overseas contractors.
Awesome. Thank you. I have a few more questions in Q&A we're going to get to. Thank you for all the people that are sticking around. So validates that this is useful info for people to know. We appreciate that. John, you asked, hey, if in the StratFi matching funds process, if you raise 5 million, will they match that funding? Yes. So for the StratFi process, you can get up to 30 million is the number here you need on the private capital side, and that'll be 15 matched by government, 15 matched by the SBIR program. And then the timeline for that is going to be any of the funding that you've raised post your phase 2 award. I'm happy to have a conversation more about the matching funds process and what that looks like. Michael, the amount of applications for the last TAC-FI StratFi round wasn't publicly released. John, you asked when you apply, if you're 5 months into your phase 2, can you still apply? For the StratFi process, you can apply after 90 days have passed. For the Army Catalyst process, you can apply anytime after the start of your phase 2. Frank,
so does that mean if they're further along, that's not a problem because they're more than 90 days?
Correct. Yeah, so it can be post that 90 days, any point after that. And the StratFi has a specific application window. The Army Catalyst program has a rolling year-long window. And OSC's applications will open up in January. And then Frank, you asked, are there sample term sheets for these programs? There's not a specific set of term sheets that the government provides, but they're standard contracts and opportunities. Can walk you and the Maximus team through any of that at any point. All right, folks, if there's no more other open questions, please say thank you to Eric for helping join and put together this wonderful webinar. And thank you all for coming. We'll send out a recording and the slides as well. We look forward to working with everybody and helping all grow and scale in the defense industrial base. Have a great Halloween.
Happy Halloween, everyone. Thanks, everyone.